Tom's Midnight Garden by Philippa Pierce. Chapter 1, Exile. If, standing alone on the back doorstep, Tom allowed himself to weep tears, they were tears of anger. He looked his goodbye at his garden and raged he had to leave it and Peter. They planned to spend their time here so joyously in the holidays. Town gardens are small as a rule, and the Longs' garden was no exception to the rule. There was a vegetable plot and a grass plot and one flower bed and a rough patch by the back fence. In this last the apple tree grew. It was large and bore very little fruit, and accordingly the two boys had always been allowed to climb freely over it. These holidays they would have built a tree house among its branches. Tom gazed and then turned back into the house. As he passed the foot of the stairs he called up, "Goodbye, Peter." There was a croaking answer. He went out onto the front doorstep where his mother was waiting with his suitcase. He put his hand out for it, but Mrs. Long clung to the case for a while, claiming its attention first. "You know, Tom," she said, "it's not nice for you to be rushed away like this to avoid the measles. But it's not nice for us either. Your father and I will miss you, and so will Peter. Peter's not having a nice time anyway with the measles." "I didn't say you'd be having a nice time without me," said Tom. "All I said was—" "Hush," whispered his mother, looking past him at the road and the car that waited there, and the man at the driver's wheel. She gave Tom the case and then bent over him, pushing his tie up to cover his collar button and letting her lips come within a few inches of his ears. "Tom, dear Tom," she murmured, trying to prepare him for the weeks ahead. "Remember you will be a visitor, and do try, what can I say, try to be good." She kissed him, gave him a dismissive push towards the car and then followed him to it. As Tom got in, Mrs. Long looked past him to the driver. "Give my love to Gwen," she said, "and tell her, Alan, how grateful we are to you both for taking Tom at such short notice. It's very kind of you, isn't it, Tom?" "Very kind," Tom repeated bitterly. "There is so little room in the house of Mrs. Long where there's illness." "We're glad to help out," Alan said, and he started the engine. Tom wound down the window next to his mother. "Goodbye, then." "Oh, Tom," her lips trembled, "I am sorry, spoiling the beginning of your summer holidays like this." The car was moving and he had to shout back, "I'd rather have had the measles with Peter. Much rather." Tom waved goodbye angrily to his mother, and then, careless even of the cost to others, waved to an inflamed face pressed up against the bedroom window. Mrs. Long looked upwards to see what was there, raised her hands in a gesture of despair. Peter was supposed to be strictly in his bed, and hurried indoors. Tom closed the car window and sat back in his seat in hostile silence. His uncle cleared his throat and said, "Well, I hope we get on reasonably well." This was not a question, so Tom did not answer it. He knew he was being rude, but he made excuses for himself. He didn't much like Uncle Alan, and he didn't want him to be liked by him at all. Indeed, he would have preferred him to be like a brutal uncle. "If only he beat me," thought Tom, "then I could run away home. Mother and father would say I did right in spite of the quarantine for measles. But he'd never try to beat me, I know. And Aunt Gwen, she's worse, because she's a child lover and she's kind. Cooped up with her for weeks with Uncle Alan and Auntie Gwen in a poky flat." He never visited them before, but he knew they lived in a flat with no garden. They drove in silence. Their route took them through Ely, but they only passed for a while for Alan Kitson to buy a picture postcard of the cathedral tower. It was for Tom. Tom was bitterly disappointed when he wasn't allowed to climb the tower, but his uncle pointed out to him with great reasonableness this was out of the question. He's in quarantine for the measles. He must not mix with Peter in case he caught the measles, but he must not mix with other people too in case he already had Peter's measles. Fortunately, the Kitsons had both had measles anyway. They drove on through Ely and Fens, and then through Castleford and beyond to where the Kitsons lived, in a big house now converted into flats. The house was crowded round with newer, smaller houses that heat up in the very confines in a broken sea of bay windows and gable ends and pinnacles. It was the only big house among them, oblong, plain and grave. Alan Kitson sounded the car horn and turned into the drive, and it was too short really to call a drive now. The house had a better frontage, I believe, until they built up opposite and had to widen the road too. He pulled up outside a pillared front door, and Aunt Gwen appeared in the doorway, laughing and wanting to kiss Tom. She drew him inside, and Uncle Alan followed with the luggage. There were some cold stone flags under Tom's feet, and in his nostrils the smell of old dust that had been nobody's business to disperse. As he looked around, he felt a chill. The hall of the big house was not mean, nor was it ugly, but it was unwelcoming. Here it lay at the heart of the house, for it went centrally from front to back, with a sideways part to the stair foot in a T shape, and the heart of the house was empty, cold and dead. Someone had pinned bright travel posters onto the high grey walls. Someone had left a laundry box with its laundry list in the corner. There were empty milk bottles against the far door with a message to the milkman. None of these things seemed to really belong to the hall. It remained empty and silent unless one counted the voice of Aunt Gwen, chattering on about Tom's mother and Peter's measles. When her voice faded for a moment, Tom heard the only sound that went on, the tick, the tick, the tick, the tick of a grandfather clock. "No, don't touch it, Tom," said Aunt Gwen when he turned towards it. She lowered her voice. "It belongs to old Mrs. Bartholomew upstairs, and she's a bit particular about it." Tom had never looked inside a grandfather clock, and he thought it might be something to do later, privately. Surely he could just take a look. Now, with his back to the clock, innocently he continued to converse with his aunt. He slipped his fingernails under the edge of the door to the pendulum case to try it. "If Mrs. Bartholomew's particular about her clock, why doesn't she have it upstairs with her?" Tom asked. He levered it gently with his nails, that the door was resisting him. "Because the clock is screwed to the wall at the back, and the screws have rusted in," said Aunt Gwen. "Come away from it, do, Tom. Come up to tea." "Oh," said Tom, as if he hadn't realised where he was standing. He moved away, and the pendulum door had been locked. They were going upstairs to the Kitsons' flat when from behind them the grandfather clock struck 1 with stately emphasis. Uncle Alan frowned and made some cutting comment. The clock kept good time. His fingers were now correctly pointing to 5 o'clock, but it seldom chose to strike the right hour. It was utterly unreliable in its striking, Uncle Alan said. Moreover, the voice of the clock was so penetrating he could even hear it being unreliable when he was upstairs in bed at night. They'd reached the first floor where the Kitsons lived. Beyond, another narrow staircase mounted to the attic flat of Mrs. Bartholomew, who owned the grandfather clock, and indeed the whole house. She was the landlady, and the Kitsons, like the other inhabitants of the big house, were her tenants. "This is our flat, Tom dear," said Aunt Gwen, "and here is the guest room, your bedroom. I've put flowers in it, and books for you to read." She smiled at him, begging with her eyes for him to like staying here. Tom's bedroom was lofty, but otherwise only medium size. There was another door in it, like the door of entry. The window, large and paned, was one of those he'd seen from outside. Tom had been preparing himself to play the grateful guest, but there are bars across the bottom of the window," he burst out. "This is a nursery. I'm not a baby." Of course not," Aunt Gwen cried, equally upset. "It's nothing to do with you, Tom. This window had bars across it when I came. The bathroom window had 2 for that matter." Tom's suspicions were not entirely stilled. When he was left to unpack before tea, Tom examined the room more closely. The other room only led into a cupboard for clothes. The books were school stories for girls from Aunt Gwen's own childhood, and there above all, however much Aunt Gwen tried to explain them all, were the nursery bars in the window. However, tea cheered Tom a little. Aunt Gwen had made a Devonshire tea with boiled eggs and homemade scones and homemade strawberry jam and whipped cream. She was a good cook, she said, and she enjoyed cooking. She was going to spoil Tom for food while he was with them. After tea, Tom wrote a letter of his safe arrival to his mother. He enclosed a picture postcard for Peter with a very fair statement of his situation. "I hope your measles are better," he wrote. "This is a picture of the Cathedral Tower, Ely." Tom knew that Peter would be interested. The two of them made a point of climbing church towers as well as trees. "We came through Ely, but UA wouldn't let me go up the tower," that's Uncle Alan. "The house here is flat and there isn't any garden. My bedroom window has bars, but AG Aunt Gwen says it's a mistake. The food is good, though." After reading this, Tom decided, in fairness to Aunt Gwen, to underline the last sentence. He signed the postcard with his private device, an elongated cat, supposed to be a tomcat. It signified Tom Long. He was masking out the whiskers of the cat when he heard the sound of the grandfather clock from below, in the hall. Yes, you could hear it striking, very distinctly. You could count the strokes. Tom counted them and smiled condescendingly. The clock was wrong again in its striking. Senselessly wrong. And the next chapter tomorrow is called The Clock Strikes 13. Bye, guys.